Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're exploring one of the biggest questions in economics, politics, and human history. Why do some countries become rich and powerful, while others remain poor or fall into decline? This is not just an academic question. It shapes people's lives, opportunities, and even their freedom. To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Robin. Welcome.
Thanks, James. I'm really excited about this conversation. This topic completely changes how you see the world. Once you understand it, you start noticing patterns everywhere.
Exactly. So let's begin with the most important question. If you had to explain the central argument in one simple sentence, what would it be?
Here it is. Nations succeed or fail mainly because of their institutions, the rules that shape how power and wealth are distributed.
So it's not mainly about natural resources?
No.
Not geography?
Not primarily.
Not even culture?
Culture matters, but it's not the root cause. The real driver is how society organizes political and economic power.
That's a bold claim.
Very bold, but also very well supported.
Let's slow down and clarify something. When we say institutions, what exactly do we mean?
Think of institutions as the rules of the game in a society. Who makes decisions? Who owns property? Who has opportunities? Who gets protected by law? Who gets ignored? All of that forms the institutional structure.
So institutions determine incentives.
Exactly. And incentives shape behavior, and behavior shape economic outcomes.
So if people know their work will be rewarded, they invest, innovate, and take risks.
Yes. But if their wealth can be taken away at any time, they don't invest, they don't build, they don't innovate.
That alone could explain huge differences between countries.
It does.
Now let's talk about the famous distinction, two types of institutions.
Right. This is the heart of the argument. There are inclusive institutions and extractive institutions. Define inclusive first. Inclusive institutions allow broad participation in economic and political life. They protect property rights, enforce laws fairly, and create opportunities for many people, not just elites.
So they include people.
Exactly.
And extractive?
Extractive institutions concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a small group. They're designed to extract resources from the many for the benefit of the few.
So the difference is who benefits from the system?
Yes, that's the key question. Does the system serve society, or does society serve the system?
Why do inclusive institutions lead to prosperity?
Because they create incentives for innovation, investment, education, and productivity. If people believe they can improve their lives through effort, they try. If they believe success will be taken from them, they stop trying.
So economic growth is as much psychological as structural.
Absolutely. Trust in the system drives long-term development.
Let's make this concrete. Give us one example that clearly shows the difference.
The most famous example is the Korean Peninsula. After World War II, it split into two countries, South Korea and North Korea. Same history, same culture, same language, same geography, but completely different political and economic systems. And the results? Massive, one of the clearest natural experiments in modern history.
So geography cannot explain that difference.
Exactly. Only institutions can.
There's another example I found fascinating, the divided city.
Yes, Nogales. One city divided by a border. One side in United States, the other in Mexico. Same climate, same terrain, same families even, but different legal systems, governance, and economic structures. And living standards differ dramatically. Exactly. Same people, different institutions, different outcomes.
Here's something that really surprised me. Sometimes rulers intentionally block economic development. Why would anyone do that?
Because development can threaten power. Innovation creates wealth. Wealth creates independence. Independence creates political demands. Elites may fear losing control more than they desire economic growth. So stagnation could be a political strategy. Yes, stability of power over prosperity of society.
That's disturbing, but also very realistic. So if we zoom out, what pattern do we see across history?
Where power is widely distributed, economies grow. Where power is concentrated, economies stagnate. And this pattern repeats across continents and centuries.
So prosperity is not random.
Never random.
So today we explored the foundation, institutions, incentives, and power. But we still haven't answered some big questions. If inclusive systems are better, why don't all countries adopt them? Can extractive systems ever grow? And how does history lock nations into certain paths?
Those are the hardest and most fascinating questions.
Perfect. Let's tackle them in the next part. Welcome back. In Part 1, we established that inclusive institutions drive prosperity and extractive institutions hold countries back. So here's the obvious question. If inclusive systems are better, why doesn't every country adopt them?
Because institutional change is not just an economic decision, it's a political struggle.
Meaning?
Inclusive systems redistribute power, and those who already have power rarely give it up voluntarily. So reform threatens elites. Exactly. Imagine a small group controlling wealth, resources, and political authority. Inclusive reform would weaken their control. From their perspective, reform is not progress, it's loss.
So even if the country would grow richer overall, they might still resist.
Yes, because they care about relative power, not total prosperity.
The book also talks about critical junctures, moments when history can change direction. Explain that.
These are major events that disrupt existing power structures, revolutions, wars, institutional crises. During these moments, societies can shift toward more inclusive or more extractive systems.
So history is not smooth, it has sudden turning points.
Exactly. And small differences in how societies respond can create huge long-term divergences.
Can you give an example?
One classic case is the gradual shift toward parliamentary power and property rights in United Kingdom. Over time, political authority became more constrained and economic opportunities expanded. That helped create conditions for industrial growth.
So political pluralism came before economic dominance.
Yes, that sequence is crucial.
This leads to another powerful concept, path dependence.
Right. Once a country starts moving in a certain institutional direction, it tends to stay on that path. Inclusive systems reinforce themselves. Extractive systems also reinforce themselves.
Why is that?
Because institutions shape incentives, and incentives shape future decisions. For example, if elites benefit from extraction, they invest in maintaining extraction. If citizens benefit from participation, they defend participation.
So history creates momentum.
Yes, and reversing that momentum can be extremely difficult.
Here's a tricky question. Can extractive systems produce economic growth?
Yes, but usually temporarily.
Explain.
An extractive regime can force rapid industrialization, mobilize labor, or exploit natural resources intensely. A famous example is the former Soviet Union. It achieved rapid industrial expansion for decades.
But it didn't last.
Exactly. Because innovation requires freedom, experimentation, and decentralized decision-making, things extractive systems struggle to allow. Eventually, growth slows, stagnates, or collapses.
So long-term growth depends on innovation, not just production.
Yes, and innovation is disruptive. It changes industries, it redistributes wealth, it challenges existing power structures,
which makes elites nervous again.
Very. That's why extractive systems often resist technological change, even when it would make the country richer.
Let's talk about modern debates. Some countries have strong state control, but impressive economic growth. For example, China. How does that fit into the theory?
That's one of the most debated cases. Some argue its growth shows extractive political systems can sustain development. Others argue its growth depends on partially inclusive economic institutions, markets, investment incentives, global integration.
So the long-term outcome is still uncertain.
Yes, the key question is whether political centralization will eventually limit innovation.
Are there examples of countries that successfully transitioned toward more inclusive systems?
Yes, though it's rare and difficult. One often discussed example is Botswana. After independence, it developed relatively inclusive political institutions, protected property rights, and managed resources carefully.
And achieved long-term economic growth.
Exactly. It shows that institutional change is possible, but it requires specific conditions and leadership choices.
Let's revisit a controversial question: culture. Some people argue certain cultures naturally produce prosperity. What do you think?
Culture influences behavior, yes, but institutions shape incentives, and incentives shape behavior over time. If rules reward entrepreneurship, people become entrepreneurial. If rules punish initiative, people become cautious.
So culture adapts to systems.
Often, yes.
If you had to give one major lesson from everything we discussed, what would it be?
Economic prosperity is fundamentally political. Who holds power? How power is constrained? How broadly opportunity is distributed? Those determine long-term development.
So wealth is not just created, it is structured.
Exactly.
Let me try to summarize. Nations don't fail because of geography alone. They don't succeed because of culture alone. They rise or fall depending on whether their institutions empower many or extract from many.
That's the essence of the argument. And the most unsettling implication? No country is permanently successful. If institutions become more extractive, decline can begin even in wealthy nations.
That's a powerful place to end. Today, we explored how power shapes prosperity, how history shapes institutions, and how institutions shape the fate of nations. Robin, thank you for an incredibly deep conversation.
Thank you. This was a great discussion.
And to everyone listening, if you want to understand the world, don't just look at wealth, look at power. See you next time.